Here we are again looking at Jiří Procházka and his training in terms of what he's doing in terms of breath training before his performance. This is a really interesting, quite a short clip, but we're going to break it down a little bit of to what he's doing. But it's an interesting look into the oxygen advantage methodology and its implementation actually in training.
That's why we are focused for short sprints, longer sprints, the strength and explosiveness from the leg, from the belly.
Here he's talking about being explosive in long and short sprints, as well as having the power from the legs and in the belly, as he says. But when we're talking about those kind of aspects, you're talking about how the diaphragm connects to the pelvis so that those things are working in tandem so that you can transport the power into your legs as well as oxygenated blood and all that other great stuff, but how those two things interact so that the system, the chain works, the kinetic chain works for you to fight.
Man, this is like my.
Here you see him setting up for sprints, breath hold sprints. These are breath holds done on empty lungs, not full lungs, which is a key difference, not just an interesting difference, but a key difference. You see the setup here where he's keeping himself honest by putting a nose peg on his nose, so he doesn't. So when he is struggling and his body is telling him he needs to breathe, because your body will subconsciously try and force you to breathe to keep you alive, to reduce that stress level. That can mean that you breathe through your nose unintentionally. So having that closed nose peg there keeps him honest to himself and to his training that he's definitely not going to breathe through that nose. But it's an interesting setup that he's got doing there. It looks very extreme in this kind of video format. It looks like an extreme thing to be doing, but it is a great way to increase that repeated sprint ability, to have that explosivity over long periods of time and recover between efforts and recover between rounds.
Without breathing, so no mouth breathing, no nose breathing, and everything has to be like closed. So that's why I have to close my nose. So this is it. I'm fighting Khalil Roundtree, and he's very dynamic.
There you go, you see him run off there at full pace. So you think that the amount of lungs you're holding, amount of air you're holding in your lungs is going to deplete very quickly in those kind of sprints because you're demanding a lot of oxygen very quickly, and that's going to mean that you're going to build up that CO2 very fast, and to offload and onload that's going to be obviously difficult because you're not breathing in oxygen because you're holding your breath, and this is why it's done over a short period, and then there's recovery. Obviously this technique is very advanced. You shouldn't be trying it without a coach or supervision, or at least consulting your doctor. It's a very high level technique and not something that should be taken lightly in any way, shape or form. And it looks very extreme, like I said before, in this kind of situation, but there are obviously key benefits in terms of your aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacities, and your repeated sprint ability.
My basement, I'm sometimes literally the same in these things, so I like to be dynamic, hard punches, hard technique, flow in the movement, so I think this will be great.
Here he's talking about the similarities between him and his opponent. They're both dynamic, they're both quick movers, they both hit hard, and so you know what you're training for. This is why you watch tape and you do everything else in terms of your training to perform at your best. But the thing I think really I want to highlight here is that you're talking about small margins. Your opponent's very similar to you in explosiveness and hitting hard. So you're talking about fine margins to get there before your opponent's explosivity works for them, to get there before they hit you. These margins are very, very slim, very small. So whilst we think of breathing as an automatic system, automatic doesn't mean optimal, but making that system more efficient, optimizing it, means that you can encroach upon those small margins. And you might be talking about half a second quicker than your opponent means you're more successful. And that might just be because your breathing is a little bit more efficient, so you can keep the heart rate a little bit lower, so you can get more oxygen to your brain. Because remember, your brain's taking about 20% of the oxygen that you breathe in, and you're only breathing in a small, like 7%, I think it might be. I might have to fact check myself on that, or you fact check me below in the comments. Is what you're getting in as you're breathing in, and then 20% of that is going to your brain. And so if you're more efficient, more oxygen can go to your brain as well as your body, so that you can think quicker, then move quicker, and that might lead to a 0.2 difference to where you're successful and your opponent's not, and you win and your opponent doesn't. I think it's very interesting when we talk about fine margins that we want training to be big, broad strokes, but these days athletes are so efficient, so elite, that we're talking fine margins. And how do we get those fine margins compared to our opponents? It's doing things like optimizing the breath. Yeah, again, I think this is a very interesting look at training and implementation of breath training into a sport like MMA. Something obviously I'm fascinated with is MMA, is football, is breath training. These are all things I really love. So if you like this video, I actually did another one on where Yuri was talking about this to a reporter, so go check that out. But make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that great stuff for the algorithm. I appreciate your support for the channel, and I will see you in the comment section.